All right, let's go ahead and get things started then. Just a minute early, but I just want to do a quick housekeeping items just to review. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us for our 2021 BSA AML virtual workshop. Glad to have everyone back on here after our break and ready to start off the afternoon session. So thanks again for joining us. Just a reminder, please keep yourself on mute during the presentation. And if you have any questions during today's presentations, please simply type those into the chat box and send those questions over to me, Glenn Younger, and I can save those until after our presenters finish their presentation. Then I'll ask them once they've wrapped up. And I've also included the link to the handouts webpage. So if you'd like to review any of these slide decks, please make sure to go to that website that I just entered in the chat box. It's westernbankers.com/BSA21 handouts. And you'll find all of the handouts from all of our presentations from today's presenters. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next presenter. So our next presenter is William Sachs. He's a senior consultant with Capco, and he's going to be talking about changing BSA monitoring systems, ensuring a smooth transition. So William, take it away.
Thank you very much. Now, we heard just before lunch Robin's wonderful presentation, and she brought it up from a validation viewpoint. I'm bringing this up from another viewpoint. I'm bringing it up from the viewpoint of a BSA officer sitting in a bank. A little bit about myself: I've been an auditor, IT auditor, and a BSA officer in my career. And having been all three, it allows me a certain, as you would say, a certain advantage. It gives me a certain angle on what I've done. Now, in this presentation, also, I have worked for FIS, and FIS, as you know, is Prime. So I do have a very good understanding of Prime, but I also have a good understanding of other systems such as Verifin and Abrigo BSA. Now, they used to be Banker's Toolbox. And I go back with those systems probably to 2008, 2009. So I have been around with a lot of these. In this presentation, what I'm going to cover is the following. I'm going to start with, this is what the presentation will cover. It will cover understanding the BSA risks unique to your institution. That's going to be the first step. The second step is on identifying monitoring controls and mitigating risk. Then understanding the controls required to develop and plan and address the system. Data controls, I'll go through configuring customer risk scoring controls. I'll give you some samples. I'll give you a few stories from my background and things that I've done that should be very interesting. And then we'll talk about setting up suspicious activity rules and scenarios. How you choose the rules, how you determine the thresholds and parameters, and how you test the rules. And then we'll discuss also the importance of reviewing the system effectiveness, accuracy, and efficiency early after the migration. That is a very big key. Now, the first key to any system, we're gonna set up a system. We have to understand what the BSA risks are in our institution. We have to know the size and location of our institution. We have to know the areas that are served by the institution. Is it in a single state? Is it localized? Do you take customers online from all over the United States? Do you accept foreign customers? Are you in multiple states? Are you in HITAs, HIFCAs? Are you in urban areas? Are you in areas that are not HIFCA and HITCA? They become very important as it is with configuring many of these systems. Many of the vendor-based systems will treat HITAs and HIFCAs as a much higher risk and may actually, I would say, maybe even overstate the risks sometimes or understate the risks. I'll bring up some examples as we go on. Customers, and you know your customers, those that are higher risks, MSBs, PEPs, trusts, anything in a higher risk product. Do you offer correspondent services to others? Do you have international trade finance? Now, with correspondent services, the real risk is offering those services. Everybody has a correspondent account, has an account with another bank, but do you offer those services? Is there transparency in the transactions? You want to take a look at also the number and type of your highest risk customers. What's your customer base? Where does it come from? How does it come from? And understand your customer transactions and volumes. Now, this is a little breakdown. This is a little chart that I usually do right at the beginning when I look at a client, or even if I was looking at myself. I take a look and say, how many of my customers are businesses and how many are consumers? What's the nature of my bank? Do I cater to large businesses? Do I cater to cash intensive businesses? Do I cater to MSBs? I was a BSA officer at one time and we had 40 MSBs. That was a huge challenge. And it brings the risk into different perspectives. Understand your customer base first. And that is, I would say, one of the most important things that you want to do. Then, understand the key BSA, AML controls. What risks do you want to mitigate? Do you want everything to be done by the automated system? Sometimes it's very hard. Sometimes you have certain manual controls in place, and the way the system comes out or the way the reports come out, you can't replace all of those manual controls. You'd love to, and perhaps as time goes on, we will be able to. Is it important? How many CTRs do you file? Do you file a large number of CTRs? We filed 600 CTRs, what was about 445 to 600 a month. We definitely wanted the CTRs being filed through the system. MSBs, what kind of controls am I going to look for? What kind of monitoring am I going to look for? And what kind of trends do we have? If it's does the vendor address the system risks? Can you separate a unique group of customers with unique rules and thresholds? Yes, most people segregate, okay, I have my businesses, I have my consumers, but maybe I have a third line of businesses. Maybe I have the fintechs. The fintechs might have you want a whole different set of parameters and thresholds for those fintechs than you're going to want for the average business. Maybe you even want to segregate, and I know Banker's Toolbox or Abrigo BSA does this very well. You can actually create a cash-intensive business group. You can create a group of lawyers, professional service providers, this type of thing. And maybe you want to separate these groups with their unique thresholds and parameters. These are things that you've got to see, and does the system allow for this? Does it allow you to do that? Are there any special controls that you have for some of the higher risk group of customers? What are you looking for in those special controls? You develop a plan. We've identified our risks. Now we're going to develop a plan. We're going to look, we're going to plan this out. We want to know what the inherent risks are. What kind of risk mitigation is required? As I said, I've talked about manual systems and controls. I'm on the East Coast, and on the East Coast, there's New York State DFS 504, and they've really saddled a lot of the banks on this establishing a system. And that system can be manual or automated. And when I do reviews of 504, many times I'm looking at the manual controls and the automated controls as a whole process. And that's what you got to look at when you look at a system, the whole process. What risks automated monitoring needs to address? And that may be dictated a lot by volume. If I don't have a lot of cash intensive businesses, that's fine. Maybe cash isn't my great concern. Maybe wires is my great concern. Maybe ACH is my great concern. Where are your concerns? Where are your risks? Understand it. And the other thing is, the system is going to score customers. Take a look at the scoring configurations. The scoring of the customers. Robin gave an excellent presentation. And one of the things she did bring up was the scoring of customers. You identify your high-risk customers. Your high-risk customers are going to need enhanced due diligence. You're going to have to do enhanced due diligence reviews on all of these customers. You don't want to have an excessive number of high-risk customers that aren't really high risk. At the same time, you don't want to miss identifying customers. And then what rule types, what kind of scenario types, what kind of behaviors do you need? Verafin is a behavioral system, as we discussed today. Others are scenario-based, and some are just strictly rule-based. What do you need? What do you require? Once you figure out the system, you start getting it going, start looking at your data. What data is feeding in to the system? And understand what data is feeding into that system. Yes, you can have an outside person look at it. Yes, you can have an outside person do it, but you can outsource the work, but you can't outsource the responsibility. You are ultimately responsible. You really should know where the data feeds from. Does it feed from the core system? Does it feed from the wire? Does it feed from ACH? If it's coming from more than one source, is the duplicate data excluded? I know when I started as a BSA officer, I had a great time, I'll tell you. We implemented a system and I said, oh, this is fantastic. Then all of a sudden I noticed all my wires are being duplicated. Why? They came from the outside feed, wire feed, and they came from the core system. So I was, okay, one of the two has to go. We kept the outside feed because the outside feed had all the beneficiary and originator information in there. And it allowed a better pattern analysis and analysis of the wire trends. Mapping. Are all transactions that represent a BSA risk included, and those that don't excluded? What do I mean by this? Do you want a lot of data in there that is not customer-oriented data? If the bank is sending money to another bank for their own investments, is that really a BSA risk? Is some other transaction, fees, interest, all of this stuff, a BSA transaction? No, they're not that important. It's the customer-related transactions that are extremely important. Daily import controls, ensuring your data is good. There should be some kind of daily import controls, daily system controls. And this was discussed a lot in the last presentation. Also, clearing out unprocessed new customers, accounts, transactions, getting them processed. What didn't fall through? I'll give you some examples of data controls from different systems. Yellow Hammer has a beautiful little, nice little chart. Here's what's coming from Jack Henry Core, and here's what's in the Yellow Hammer. And here are the differences. Know those differences. Reconcile them periodically. If you have a nice little report there and you can reconcile them periodically, do so. It really shows the strength of control. Prime has import controls for customers, accounts, and transactions, along with various unprocessed queues. Know those unprocessed queues, know where those transactions come from, and maybe even build. I know one bank that actually has built a interface between their core and their BSA system. They actually created this interface, and they have a daily reconciliation. The daily reconciliation is not just the amount of transactions that go through, it's the amount of customers, the amount of accounts, transactions, And then for OFAC, it even goes as far as vendors. They even have the number of vendors, number of customers, number of transactions, and they look at all of those because they want to see what's going into the prime OFAC reporter. Abrigo, BAM. They have something called what's called Vega data management queues and mapping. Those management queues need to be cleared out. You have to understand. And in those management queues, you will find not just the non-validated, you'll see what's also validated, excluded, understand what's excluded, and understand what's ignored and what's been thrown out of there. Verifin gives a nice little daily dashboard for the BSA officer, and I think it's one of the nicest. I mean, I could see on a daily basis, I'm sitting there, oh, I have this nice little dashboard, everything's green. Looks like we're good to go today. And these are the kind of data controls you're looking for, and understand those data controls. You as a BSA officer need to understand those data controls, need to understand it. Do you need to be the technician? No. You may still need to hire someone to come in from the outside and really do a thorough review, but understand the basics, understand what you've got, because at the end of the day, you're ultimately responsible. You're the one who's going to have to explain to the regulators what you've done, what your system does, and how it does it. Oh, we had a validation. Oh, yeah, the model's been validated by the vendor. Great. But at the end of the day, the regulators are going to be looking at you and asking you questions. So you got to know what's happening. Customer risk scoring is an important feature in any BSA system. It will drive your enhanced due diligence rules. Additionally, specific risk classes will have different thresholds. And I'm going to put it very simply. If I have a high risk customer, I'm probably going to put a lower threshold on it. I want to pick up maybe someone who exceeded their profile by 25%. Whereas I'll put on the low risk, I'll put on maybe 100%, and maybe I'll put a dollar value on it at $5,000. I don't want that student who's bringing in $10 a week, all of a sudden brings in money one time and paying for books. That's absolutely normal for $300 or $400, $500, who knows what it is today, but they bought some books, they bought something else. I don't need to know that. I need to know where the risk is and what broke those planes. And the institution will have to explain it to the regulators at some point in time. Why did they set it up this way? Why did they do it this way? Prime has different configurations in determining profiles. Thresholds will vary between high risk, medium risk, and low risk, with different tolerances used for each class. Other systems have separate thresholds. When you get to the rules will have some different thresholds for high, medium, and low. But are those customers properly identified? That's the big thing. I like to use the IAP approach. This is my own type of approach. Identify, analyze, and perform internal testing. When I want to see if something's working right, I want to use this approach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by identifying. I'm going to identify the type of rules I can set up. How can I set up the customer scoring? I identify the industry type, length of relationship, customers, my geography. What's important to me? What do I want to consider as a dominant item? What do I want to consider as, well, this is always going to be high risk? Is it a PEP? Probably. Is it if I filed a SAR on them? Probably. Probably if I had negative news when I did my enhanced due diligence, I'm probably going to want that as a high risk. Verifin has global parameters and risk agents. And they will have global parameters for scoring agents. And you want to give those scoring agents a careful consideration. There's a whole chart inside Verifin that actually tells you the scoring configurations and where it's coming from. It's extremely important. Now, I'm moved over from system A to system B. Now, I've done my migration. I'm looking at my customer risk. And I see, oh, this is 7% high, 13% medium, and 80% low. What did my other system say? My high was 25%, my medium was 50%, and my low was whatever. But the point is, do both systems favorably compare? And if they don't, why don't they compare? What is the difference between the two? Is the new system just rating the customers better? Or customers that are known high-risk customers, and you will have been doing your enhanced due diligence on those customers. Are they really high risk? You've done the enhanced due diligence, you know they're high risk, but why aren't they coming up at high risk on the new system? That is probably one of the first things you got to look at. The next step is analyze the customers in the highest risk range. Ensure these high-risk customers have high-risk attributes. Is a customer in that high-risk range really high risk? As I said, I wouldn't want to have 500 high-risk customers all of a sudden and have to do 500 enhanced due diligence reviews when I'm used to doing probably 100. It's going to be quite a chore. Compare the high risk from the prior system to the new system, as we've said. One of the places I really look at is the lowest end of the high risk range and the highest end of the medium risk range. This is very important. For those medium risk customers at the highest end, ensure that they are appropriately scored. If they get additional activity, will they go up to high risk? Does it make sense for them to be there? I'll give you a little story. I was in a bank. I got called on an assignment a couple of years back, and I was in a bank, and they asked, and the bank was saying, we just went through a horrible internal audit. Well, it wasn't an internal audit. They actually had a company come in and do their independent testing, their BSA independent testing audit. And I will tell you that they said, well, we had a horrible audit. We were not happy with the results, but they brought up some points. And one of the points they brought up was, well, they wanted some improvements on enhanced due diligence, but at the same time, they said there were customers in the medium risk range that were really high risk customers, that they felt were high risk customers. They're using Verifin. Oh, Verifin's going to score perfectly, isn't it? I mean, look, Verifin is this automated behavioral system that's absolutely perfect. Well, it is if you configured it right. Well, I went in, I helped them with a lot of their processes, and I helped them with the risk scoring, and we went through quite a bit. And lo and behold, I found what the situation was, and I found a solution. And we ended up getting those customers in that medium risk range moving up to higher risk. What a lot of it was, the bank was not located in a HITA or HIFCA, had no other factors that geographically were there, except for the fact that they were in a tourist area. Being in a tourist area, you have a transient population coming in and out, especially during the summer months. You have people coming there on vacation, people coming in from the outside. You do have a number of people coming in. So there is a risk. That risk wasn't being reflected in Verifin. When it was finally reflected, the risk ratings came out very nice. Then at the end of the day, what I like to do is I like to go in and look at those customers, test them, identify the factors that are driving the risk. And as I'm going to show you on the next slide, I usually create a little chart. I call it high risk business driving factors. And I look at it. In this case, what's wrong with this picture? I'm going to tell you the first thing that I think is wrong with this picture. It's too transaction oriented. I believe that industry should count for more than 13%. I believe that geography should count more than 6%. I also believe that there may be another couple of inherent factors that could have been put into this model. And I usually like to see the static factors like industry, geography, tax ID numbers, other things, length of relationship to be a lot more than this. I usually like to see maybe the transactions at 40 or 50%, not 70 or 80%. And you're going to see it here. Same thing here. Very high, very high. And now wires, okay, very high. This was a bank that had international wires, yeah. I would expect wires to drive a good portion of this. It's driving 32% of my medium risk, but it's only driving 27% of my high risk. Whoa, I would think that the high risk wires would have really driven this a lot further. And ACH only 13%. Wait a minute. And 14%. I would think ACH would have been driving. RDC, all the RDC customers are vetted. I know who they are. I know what their transactions are. Why is RDC driving 21%? These are questions that you have to answer for yourself when you go in and you try to do this internal testing. The first thing I would do is segregate business and personal customers, then segregate high, medium, and low risk. It's very important here to go above and below the line. I have alluded to this already. Everyone talks about above and below the line with suspicious activity rules. Here, I'm bringing up above and below the line on customer risk scoring. If customer risk, if my breakoff point is 65 points, I really want to test a sample between 65 and 70. Then I want to go just below that, 60 to 64. What is in those accounts? In this way, I'm testing above and below the line. And I'm seeing in that 60 to 64, hopefully, if something was really high risk, it would be on the upper end of the medium risk range, I would hope. But, I can see if this new system is scoring where it's supposed to be scoring. This kind of internal analysis, don't wait 6, 8, 9 months, 10 months for an outside person to do it. Do your own analysis inside house first. Make sure you're comfortable with what you got. Getting an outside opinion is absolutely mandatory sometimes. Most of the time, 95% of the time, I would say it is. And you'd want to have that. The importance is critical to have these come out correctly. In Prime, they use profile cases, and they're determined by the thresholds in each range. And there may also be, as I've alluded to already, enhanced due diligence. You may end up doing enhanced due diligence as your higher end of the medium risk range. I have seen clients that have a system where they go not just high, medium, and low, but they go high, and then they go medium high, medium, medium low, and then they go into the low risk range. And so that's very important. Now we go to the next slide. Suspicious activity rules. Now, in suspicious activity rules, you want to evaluate the template rules that are available. You want to take a look at what's available from the system. What filtering criteria and parameters are used in that system to generate alerts? And are they reflective of the BSA risks? Now, this goes back to that whole beginning part of this presentation. Understand your risks. Understand what drives this. Understand where you're filing your SARs. Is there an alignment when you create these rules? The parameters and thresholds should be aligned to the risks. When the alerts come out, they should be aligned to the risks. If my greatest number of SARs is filed with wires, I would want to see wire alerts coming out that are meaningful. If the greatest amount of alerts coming out are for structuring, I would expect most of my SARs to be structuring SARs. It's really important to understand what your suspicious activity is and what you're trying to get at. Determine what rules are necessary. And sometimes you'll have rules that you'll have in place that just won't generate a whole lot of activity for you. They just won't come out with a whole lot, but they're valuable rules. I've had people say, well, I want you to look over the system with me, blah, 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 blah. But, I have these rules and they're just not generating a whole lot. Well, you're targeting higher risk countries that you don't do business with. But when you do get an alert on that rule, it's important. I may only get one a year, but that might be an important one. Something was sent to a geography, a high risk country somewhere that is not in my profile. Another thing, I knew one bank that was not cash intensive, and they had a couple of rules that dealt with velocity between cash and wires, cash and other things. And the rule between cash and wires wasn't generating a whole lot. We didn't expect it to. But if it did, when it did address something, it was important. You have to know those rules too and make sure that they're coming out the way you want them. I also I take a look at what kind of rules does the system have, if the system is rules-based. And I try to identify the nature of the rule. Is the rule structuring, cash structuring? That may be my most important. Then I'm going to look wires. Do they really analyze my common wire rules? Common wire rules. One beneficiary sending to multiple originators, originator sending to multiple beneficiaries, looking at patterns, looking at geographies. Is that important for me? It should be. It should be for many banks. But if you just use domestic wires, you know what your domestic wires are, you have almost no international wires, it may not be your highest priority. But those are the more effective ones that I see, is velocity, spikes, structuring, and wire rules. If the rules are just based on volume, they're probably telling you what you already know. Oh, this rule is telling me that these customers are doing a lot of cash. You probably already know that. You sit there and you look and you say, oh yeah, well, I filed these 5 customers, I'm filing 20% of my CTRs, 30% of my CTRs on them. I can't exempt them for one reason or another. They may not be exemptable, but the point is, they already tell you what you already know. Another bank, they dealt with many of the, they had people of wealth, let's put it that way, and people that I actually recognized in the news. And I'm like, okay, this is what they got. And they had a wire rule and an ACH rule that I took a look at and I said, why would they have this rule in place? And the people who came up on it were the same people every single month. And I looked at the alerts and the alerts came out, oh, the money is coming directly from the NFL. Oh, okay. That's exactly where it is. So it's very interesting. Also, try to do a test run and be careful here. Really look at your risks. If the bank has an IAT rule or has an international wire rule, and you know they're doing a lot of international wires, yet they have no alerts, what's going on? Is something amiss? Are there issues there? That could be your best issue. You probably know as a BSA officer when you implement that system that I know I do this much volume. You're doing your risk assessment every year. You're going to know your volumes. You're going to know your domestic wires, your international wires, and you're going to know where they are. And if you're doing a high level of international wires and you're not getting any international wire alerts, whoa, red flag, step back. Let's take a look. Why? What's not coming through? I know I worked probably 6 months with a fairly large bank. We were implementing a customer scoring system. But one of the things we found is that there was actually international wires, and many of their high wire customers were not being risk scored for the wires. And I was taking a look at it, and we found out that one of the international wire feeds wasn't feeding through from one of their correspondents. So it was very interesting. But use your own logic. Think about it. This could make or break you. Identify each rule, its parameters and thresholds. Start monitoring and analyzing them by month. And the way I like to analyze them is the way I just described it to you. I like to take and say cash structuring rules, spike rules, volume rules, geography rules. I know which ones are more important to me than anything else. And I can see many of the systems have a rule efficiency report. Now, when I'm talking about rule efficiency, I'm not really talking about alerts to SARS. I'm more looking at alerts to cases, alerts to potentially suspicious activity. Our effective rule doesn't have to always come out with SARS. It can come out with potentially suspicious activity. Is it generating alerts that if I can resolve an alert in 5 seconds? When I was a BSA officer, I looked at the alerts every day, and I sat back there and I said, this first 10, they're not even suspicious. I knew the rule wasn't set right. But I was going back and forth with the examiner on, the examiner wanted the thresholds lowered. I wanted the thresholds raised. I mean, it was a fight. But I could tell immediately. I said, no, these are not. But that's not an effective alert, in my opinion. When I have to take an alert and start looking at it, and I start seeing, well, we got a customer here along the shore with an ice cream store, and they're coming up with 9,000, 6,000, 7,000. Are they structuring? Well, that's important. We took a good hard look at that one. We actually found out that during the season and then during the fall months, whenever there was an event, they did go over the CTR threshold, and that was just what they were doing. And it was a little more than just a stand. They actually had about 3 stores when we did our full enhanced due diligence. So we were able to come out with why. Use your common sense, and take a look and say, what's going on? Investigate. Create types of rules and graphs and effectiveness charts that will show the alerts. Help identify those alerts with above and below the line testing and tuning. And that's exactly what you want to do. You want to go above and below the thresholds and parameters. Now, in that threshold tuning, you might want to also consider the number of days, not just the dollar amounts, the number of days, the minimum transaction amount, the aggregate transaction amount, number of days analyzed. Does it make sense? We had one where we were looking at, we had just implemented a foreign geography rule. And originally we took it and we did it weekly. We ended up tuning it and we ended up doing it monthly. Why? Because in a month we could really see the patterns. In a week, we were having repeated alerts from the same subset of customers. It really wasn't effective on a weekly basis as it was on a monthly basis where we could see a pattern analysis. We also came up with certain rules that we went on a quarterly basis so we could really see the pattern analysis over a quarter, not over a month or a day, you know? So that's kind of what you want to look at. We talked about test environment, and Robin brought up a very good point. Test environments are getting more expensive, but if you can get a test environment, I would say it's an ideal thing. And when you want to, you get into that test environment and you identify your rules, you identify its configuration. And the easiest and best approach when you do this is to create a baseline. Here's the rule. I usually take a screenshot of it. And then what I'll do is I will summarize the alerts and their alignments of suspicious activity. What have my alerts from this rule been for the last 6 months? How do they align to potentially suspicious activity? What cases have come out of this? Does it make sense? I'll document the rules, thresholds, then I'm going to test the baseline. And testing the baseline is important because when I go above and below the line, I can see how they can compare to the baseline. Am I losing alerts that could be potentially suspicious? Am I gaining alerts that are just absolutely not even in alignment to potentially suspicious activity? If the rules are daily, rules or scenarios are daily, determine if multiple alerts are created for the same activity, very similar to what I just mentioned. From the configuration, you can click the modify mode and you can sit there and you can test. The test system is always, I think, one of the best ways of doing it. The overall approach is shown on the next slide. And this is what I do when I want to tune rules internally. When I go and I understand what my rule, why I've set up my rules. I understand the parameters and thresholds. I understand the configuration. And then I come out and I say, I analyze the cases and I draw alignment as potentially suspicious activity. I create a test plan for each rule. Now, you always hear above and below the line. Do you have to go above and below the line all the time? No. You have to use a little common sense and you have to use some analysis. You can analyze that rule and say, it doesn't make sense for me to go below the line. I'm already at a minimum threshold. I'm not going to lower it any lower. Additionally, my alignment to potentially suspicious activity is very low. It's logical that I'm going to test above the line. Sometimes you test above and below the line to see if you're missing anything. But I always like to say, analyze first. Make a case for going above the line. Make a case for going below the line. Make a case for where you're going to go. Am I going to increase this by 10% or 20%? Use some analysis, use some figures, you know, call in some help if you need it from the outside if you're trying to come up with a test plan, but know why you're doing it and where you're doing it. Develop conclusions, recommendations, and get suggestions as appropriate. You may need someone who knows that system inside and out to help you out with it. These are my final thoughts and where I'm coming from on this. First of all, understand your BSA risks unique to your institution. Identify your monitoring controls. You're going to mitigate that risk. Data, never underestimate data. Data flow, data mapping, data controls, systems, all very important. Remember, import controls are critical. Test customer scoring, compare to the prior system, analyze, go above and below the line for each class, set up suspicious activity rules and scenarios, customize, and make it commensurate to the risks of your institution. Additionally, take a look and always monitor the system effectiveness, accuracy, and efficiency right after the migration. I've gotten into several of them where a bank changed systems. This is my consulting world. This is where I came in, and this is also from my audit experience. I came in and I said, whoa, wait a minute. This bank has always had approximately 150 high-risk customers. They just went over to Verifin. They've got 18. Whoa, what just happened here? And it took a little testing, a little going through. It took going through those Verifin configurations, and we actually found out that certain configurations weren't even clicked on. And once we did, we found out, oh, gee. And it was interesting. We went from the 100 to, they went from 18 to, then they went to 1,500 after we made the first adjustments. And we had to go and make another set of adjustments, and we brought it down. And eventually, where they had 150 from before, they had about 135 at the end of the day, and it was pretty close. And I actually felt that Verifin was rating the system a little bit better. But it's not the system. It's not that. It's taking a look at what makes sense for your bank. You know your high risk. You know where your high risk is. Is your scoring correct? Suspicious activity. Am I getting suspicious activity alerts that make sense for my risk? My risk and my SARs are all filed with cash structuring and wires, the majority of them. Why am I getting all of these on by ACH volume? Why am I getting these RDC alerts when the RDCs are fully vetted from the beginning to end? This is where it really comes in, that you really got to use your brain and start thinking and saying, is the system giving me what I want? And I'd really just like to thank you all for listening to me today. And if there are any questions, please feel free. Have there been any questions, Glenn?
I have not seen any questions come in. So if you do have any questions for William, just reach out to me and let me know, and I can follow back up with them. But thank you very much for your presentation today, William. We appreciate it.
Oh, no problems.
Great. Thank you.
No problems. It was my pleasure to present today.
Great. Thank you.
And I hope the audience found this useful. And you may contact me at this number if you ever have any questions. I would be more than happy to answer.
Great. Thanks, William. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.